Before that, Rod Stewart with his cover of Temptations, fantastic track called I Know I'm Losing You. And it kind of links us nicely, because it's originally by the Temptations, onto the Motown label. And I'm really pleased to say that our guest tonight, Mr. Derek Shelmerdine, is here. And our subject tonight is the Motown Story. Derek, as usual, welcome to Meridian, and thanks for coming in.
Oh, my pleasure. I've been looking forward to it all month. Motown Story, what a great style that is.
It needs to get out a little bit more, doesn't it?
Music be the food of love.
I love the sessions that we do, because I truthfully, in the main, I never know what's coming up. Because I know a bit about Motown, but not much. But I hope you're going to really... You've been out there digging with your shovel, and you've unearthed something that perhaps only Berry Gordy himself knows about.
Well, it could be.
And you can say what you like, as long as we don't get sued.
I always try and avoid being sued. No, I think we'll leave that one. Berry Gordy, this is the guy that started it all, Berry Gordy Jr., born on the 28th of November 1929, Detroit, Michigan. The guy was a very talented songwriter, producer, and that's something he followed through after he'd set up the Motown label. He wrote an awful lot of the stuff, he produced a lot of it, and he was also a professional boxer. He had, I did see the figures, he had a couple of dozen fights, and he won three quarters of them, and about 5 KOs.
So you really didn't want to mess with him, did you, in the office? You know, if he said your harmonies are off, then they were off.
It was time to get a pitch or two sorted out. And apparently I read somewhere that he used to spar with Jackie Wilson, which might have been where he met him, because one of the early starts he had really was as a songwriter. His real break came with Jackie Wilson's Reet Petite, which is a great song. That was released in 1957. And Berry Gordy originally took a loan of $800 to found the Tamla.
What year are we talking about then?
That was, the 12th of January 1959, he set up Tamla. See, what's interesting, in the UK, we'll come on to this later, everything was released on Tamla Motown. So you tend to think of all this as Tamla Motown. But the reality was that he had a bunch of different labels, and all these famous artists were recording on all different labels. They were all released in the UK on Tamla Motown. But it wasn't for another year that he actually decided to set Motown up. He did a very smart thing when he set Tamla up originally. He also set a music publishing company called Jobette up. He sort of took the name of that from his children's names, because long term that's where the money is. Own the publishing rights in this life, and you're on to a very smart move. Marv Johnson was the first actual single on Tamla, although it only had a limited release because its main release was on United Artists, and that was co-written by Gordy with Marv Johnson. And it was Smokey Robinson that very much encouraged Gordy to get into all this and set Tamla / Motown up. And what we'll see is a lot of these acts come out of the doo-wop era. If you look at Smokey Robinson, he was in a group called the Matadors, and one of the strokes of luck he had is that his band did an audition for Jackie Wilson's manager, and Jackie Wilson's manager doesn't like them, and for some reason Berry Gordy was actually in that particular meeting or audition, and he thought, I like these guys, so he signed them up. They changed their name to the Miracles, and he signed them up to the one of the Motown stable of labels. So it was very much. Smokey Robinson, the Miracles, played a major part, 'cause he was a major songwriter as well. So a lot of the songs were written by Smokey Robinson. And what I do love is when Berry Gordy set his recording studios up, the headquarters, outside over the front door, easy to find a photograph of this. It's got Hitsville, USA across the top in great big letters. And I always thought that was a great way to, a great thought to have about setting up a recording studio. And the Miracles was the first Motown release. But again, that was a limited release because it was initially released, and now we're at August 30th, 59. It was originally released on Chess, and then a couple of 3 weeks later, it got a limited release on Motown. But the first full Motown release was the Satin Tones. You know, not a name that springs readily to mind for anybody apart from a collector. I wouldn't think.
Do you know if it sold the first one?
Oh, they were minor hits.
Yeah,
they were all minor hits. These particular songs. I mean, it's a couple of years before he gets into his first number one, and you know the success. It's a slow burning success, really. But I mean, success it was. I mean, he had labels. He named one of the labels after himself. So there's a gaudy label that you'll find some of these recordings on. A label called Miracle. I wonder where that name came from. Another one called Soul, a very apt name for a whole genre of soul music, and one called Workshop Jazz that will crop up shortly with the Four Top story. They had a house band. A lot of these sort of major producers stroke record labels had house bands. I mean, Stax had Booker T and the MGs, Spectre had the Wrecking Crew, and Motown had the Funk Brothers. Again, you know, like just like the Wrecking Crew, really, really tasty session musicians who, you know, were featured on all the singles and had their own very distinctive sound. But really, I mean, the miracles are really starting to come to the fore now. And in 1960, sort of fall of 1960s, they'd have said in America, they released Shop Around. And what's quite nice is the first female to sign to Motown was a lady called Debbie Dean, and hers was an answer song. Hers was Don't Let Him Shop Around. But I thought, you know, no Motown story could start without hearing the Miracles Shop Around, the first real hit.
The unmistakable voice there of Mr. Smokey Robinson, of course, and the Miracles, and Shop Around. Derek, when you bought, was that off of a bit of vinyl you put that on there? Or was
no, that is a CD.
It was it? Because I thought they must have copied it sort of in an analogue way, because there was a few little crackles and hisses and bits of it, which is great.
Yeah.
It brings the atmosphere to it.
How it should be, shouldn't it?
It should be. It's got that. It's got that.
It feels real. Then.
It does, doesn't it?
When you hear the odd crackle.
It does. It feels human.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I say. It feels human.
I love vinyl.
Yeah.
And it's having a big resurgence at the moment.
Oh, that good old bit of vinyl. You can't beat a bit of vinyl.
Yeah, I did record fairs very regularly some years ago, and I'd be one of the very few vinyl dealers there, mostly CD guys. But I've started doing them again now, because I do them as book signings now, of course, a few records, and take some books
my
along.
guest last week, Simon Eadie, he did. He came in to talk about his because he met Mark Bolan and Mickey Finn a few times, and because he printed the cover of the Slider album, and he told the story of it. It was very interesting, very interesting. But his main thing now is vinyl dealing. He's he does record fairs and everything. It's so interesting, so interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I was at one just before Christmas, and it was completely the opposite story. There, it was all CD dealers, vinyl dealers with just a couple of CD guys. So vinyl is very definitely becoming the medium of choice again. Well,
I guess with CDs, I mean, you can get some CDs that actually do cost quite a bit of money, but in the main, they're pretty easy to get hold of, aren't they? The CD, but whereas your vinyl, once it's pressed, that's it.
The thing about vinyl as well, it's all about the original label.
Oh, absolutely.
Which pressing it is.
Yes.
You know, people can get
the number.
Absolutely, they can get very, very focused in the world of vinyl.
We were actually talking about this last week, but I looked it up when I got in, and Ringo Starr sold his copy of the White Album, which is 00001.
All right.
He sold it for $650,000,
and that's just because of the sleeve.
Well, it's because it's his,
and
because
his
of the number.
Of
he's probably signed it, etc., etc. $650,000. Not bad, eh?
But I mean, those. Because the White Album was the one that had the numbering on the front, and I haven't looked for a while at what they're selling for now. But the first 100 sell for very, very large amounts of money.
Big money.
But meanwhile, back at the plot, we're now in the very early 60s. 60 that was late. 1960, and by 1961, bands like the Temptations are starting to come into the game. And again, they very much come from a doo-wop background. There were two bands at the time. There was a guy called Otis Williams, who'd been with the Siberians, which I always thought was a great name, and he'd scored an audition with Berry Gordy, but his own band wasn't really functioning at the time, and he knew another doo-wop band, local doo-wop band, the Primes. So the Distance and the Primes got together. They called themselves the Elgins, and then auditioned for Berry Gordy. He thought, oh, this is excellent. But there was already a band called the Elgins, so they decided to change their name to the Temptations. And, this now is middle of 1961. Their first single on Miracle Records, which over here, well, at that time it wouldn't have been released on Tamla Motown, but that was Miracle. And that was called Oh Mother of Mine, and that was 61, summer of 1961. One of the original members, a guy called Al Bryant, left. Now we're getting more into the sort of 63, 64 time. And David Ruffin joined. And David Ruffin then became one of the Classic Five. So, when people talk about the Temptations and the Classic Five, they're talking about Otis Williams, Melvin Franklin, Eddie Kendricks, Paul Williams, and David Ruffin.
David Ruffin, is he related to Jimmy?
Yes, it's his brother. I think it's his brother.
Wow.
It's either his brother or his cousin, but I'm pretty sure it's his brother. No, there's a lot of talented guys out there. But they then soldiered on with quite a few singles. But it wasn't until 1964, beginning of 64, with The Way You Do the Things You Do, written by Smokey Robinson, that they started to find commercial success. And then they went on to become one of the greatest Motown bands of all, I think, the Temptations.
And of course, they were on Jules Holland not long ago, still going after all this time.
Yeah.
Let me just butt in there, Derek. Holly's written in, she says she's listening in the good old USA, and she said she's actually got Hitsville, USA as her phone wallpaper.
Oh, brilliant.
And she lives she says 3 hours from us. I assume that's driving, because obviously in the USA you fly as well, don't you? But I can only imagine she's driving. But that's fantastic. And you pick your phone, every time you answer it, all you see is Hitsville, USA. Yeah, thanks, Holly.
Yeah, that's got to be a great way to start any day, with a view of that. And the Supremes actually came out of the same mould. They were schoolgirls when they got together, and they tried to get, they did get an audition, but they were sort of, I think, 14, 15, 16 at the time, and Berry Gordy thought they were far too young, but they persisted, and they kept coming in, and then they would get some background vocal parts on some of the early records, and eventually... Was
Diana Ross with them at this point?
Yeah, she was one of them.
Right.
They were calling themselves the Primettes. They were a sort of sister band of the Primes, which became the Temptations. And eventually, Berry Gordy gave in and said, oh, go on. Why don't you get together with us? Yeah, with Diana Ross, Mary Wilson, Florence Ballard, and another lady who sort of went off, that never really found major fame with them. So, like a lot of these other stories, they're all very inbred. A lot of people are already involved in areas, and it all sort of comes together, and they become.
I have a very tenuous link to a this is my Tamla Motown story. Do you want to? I'll say it very quickly, and I may have told this before, but in about 1980, I used to live in a bedsit, so basically one room in Tooting Beck it was. And the people next door, they weren't very savoury. I never met them, but they had this habit of getting up, getting in about 2 o'clock in the morning. And obviously I'm fast asleep. And they play a Diana Ross record at the most ridiculous volume. Of course, and wake everyone up. Yeah. And they did this so often. Of course, you bang on the wall, tell them to turn it down, and they completely ignore it, and just wake you up and everything like that. So they did it one Friday night, woke everyone up. And I thought, I'm going to get you. I am going to get you. So the following day, I could hear them watching television or doing something like that. So I got one of my speakers, and it was a hefty beast, this speaker, and I pressed the face of it, the speaker side of it, right up against the wall.
Yeah.
I then put everything on top of it, pillows, duvets, blankets, dressing gowns, cushions, anything I could to muffle the sound on my side.
Right.
I turned the other speaker off, so everything was just going to this one speaker. And I then played the whole of one side, bearing in mind that they'd played me Diana Ross.
Oh, right.
I played the whole of one side of Judas Priest, Unleashed in the East. The whole thing at the most incredible volume that I could stand on my side. And when it had finished, I could hear their television up as loud as it would possibly go. And but the great thing was, they never did it again.
There's a model.
It never, ever happened. I always say, I'm a great believer in fighting fire with fire.
Exactly.
They never did again. Anyway, that's my Tamla Motown link story, tenuous though it is.
Oh, it's a great story, though. It shows in life, how good music can solve so many problems. So I think that's a great story. I mean, the whole doo-wop thing carries on as well. I mean, Marvin Gaye. I mean, he was in a band called the Marquis. And he hooks up a little later with another band called the Moonglows. And this is Harvey Fuqua, who was very much driving the Moonglows. But I say driving because Alan Freed, the famous American DJ, actually sort of discovered them. And it was Freed that gave them the name, the Moonglows. And I think they recorded, I'm not sure if it was their first thing, but certainly the first one they recorded with Alan Freed was on Freed's Champagne label. And this is when Freed was working in Cleveland, so I think this is the early mid 50s. But by the time we get to 1959, I mean, the Moonglows are going very strong. I mean, they were one of the premier doo-wop groups of the time. They had a new lineup which featured Marvin Gaye as the lead singer. Now, the reason this is, again, it all becomes incestuous is Harvey Fuqua became a very early executive at Motown Records, and he brought Marvin Gaye in. And at this time, Marvin Gaye was spelling his name G-A-Y, as in happy. And
happy in those days, not now.
Absolutely. I was in the Gay Cavalier. Just met the guy had a big smile, and he changed his name when he came to Motown, and for some reason added the Eon. There's a Buddy Holly story coming in the next hour that talks about how he lost an E along the way, and his first single was again, one that only collectors are going to be aware of. A single called "Let Your Conscience Be Your Guide," and it wasn't that was mid '61, and it wasn't until the Christmas of '62 that he started to have hits with "Hitchhike." Was one of the earlier ones. And that starts to tell the story about how American music was going in lots of different directions at this time. And, one of the directions it went in was dance crazes, twist, hitchhike, swimmer, and all kinds of things. But it was around this time now, well, to be precise, August the 21st, 1961, that Motown had its first Billboard #1, when the Marvelettes released Please Mr. Postman. But 62 is when Little Stevie Wonder came on board with a brilliantly named song called I Call It Pretty Music, brackets, but old people call it the blues, parts 1 and 2. What a great title.
Was it his own composition?
I'm not sure, to be honest. It could well have been, but it featured Marvin Gaye on drums.
Oh wow!
But certainly, if he didn't write it, it would have been probably something like Smokey Robinson. And this is now 62. This is when Holland Dozier Holland came onto the scene. Again, 3 talented guys. They were musicians. Artists rather, not necessarily musicians, and writers, producers, and they'd all been working with previous Motown people before they got together, either in some combination of the 3 or just individually or with other people. And it was 62 when Lamont Dozier and Brian Holland started working together, and Eddie Holland joined them about a year later, the end of that particular year. and one of the greatest songwriting teams of all time, Holland, Dozier Holland, was born. And one of the early hits they had was Martha and Vandellas' Heat Wave. That was when they were 63 now. That's really when it was all starting to work out, I think, for Motown. I mean, the success is coming thick and fast now. I mean, the kind of things they wrote for the Supremes in 1964, they wrote Where Did Our Love Go and Baby Love. The Isley Brothers in 66, they wrote This Old Heart of Mine. And Marvin Gaye, How Sweet It Is, they wrote in 64. But I must confess that Junior Walker and the All-Stars version of How Sweet It Is on their Roadrunner album is one of my all-time favourite songs. And they also wrote the Four Tops, Baby I Need Your Loving. And we'll talk about the Four Tops in a couple of minutes. This is Baby I Need Your Loving.
It certainly is. And we're talking to Derek Shelmerdine. This is our Tamla Motown special. If you'd like to get in touch, our email, studio@meridianfm.com. But, some great music. Baby, I Need Your Loving, the Four Tops, and the unmistakable voice of Levi Stubbs. Wonderful sound.
Absolutely brilliant. They're actually my favourite Motown artist stroke band. In fact, they're the second album I ever bought. The first that I ever bought was the Rolling Stones' first album. The Four Tops' second album was the second album I ever bought, and the first stereo album I ever bought was the Four Tops' Reach Out. So I've always had quite a soft spot for the Four Tops, and to say they come from doo-wop is a bit of an understatement. They started life, the same four guys started life in 1954 as the Four Ames, and they changed their name to the Four Tops soon afterwards because they didn't want to be confused with the Ames brothers. But they were beavering around long before they ever came on Berry Gordy's radar screen. The first single ever released is in '56, a track called Grady, on some obscure indie American label. But they did have a bash with a song on Chess at one point, and after I think they'd released 4 singles before they joined Berry Gordy's Band of Warriors. But they joined on the Workshop Jazz label. They had an audition on the 13th of April 1963, and they were working on an album called Breaking Through on the Workshop Jazz label. And if you look at contemporaneous inner album sleeves, one of them has an advert for the upcoming Breaking Through album that says the Four Tops singing classics and jazz and show standards. But that album never actually got released. It was one of rock and roll's great lost albums, and it was finally released on a series called something like Motown Golden Vaults in 1999. So it's Four Tops listeners can actually hear what these guys sounded like earlier on. And the guys were together, the same band, unlike the Temptations, who had a bunch of lead singers and loads of people through the ranks. Those same 4 guys were together until 1997. When Lawrence Payton died.
Incredible, that, isn't it?
Absolutely amazing. I mean, what a great... I didn't manage to see them once or twice.
You did?
Yeah. They came over to the UK.
Oh, yeah.
I saw them in one of these sort of supper club concert-type environments. And it was a great environment to watch them.
I guess you were pretty close to them as well, then?
Absolutely. Oh, yeah, absolutely, which is great. I mean, it's great to see people like the Stones.
So I bet you could actually hear their voices, not via through the microphone, but actually the voice itself.
Yeah, I mean, you could hear the richness of the 3 of them. And what was nice is Levi Stubbs could well have gone solo like so many people did, but he never did. He stayed together as a band, and I think he was absolutely right to do that, because the chemistry those 4 guys had was unbelievable. It's amazing
they can stay together musically that long, and also personally as well. I mean, there's very few bands can stand the sight of each other after half of about 6 months, let alone sort of 30, 40 years.
Yeah, exactly.
It's phenomenal, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's just a testament to what a great band they are, really. And that was their first hit single. They went on to have a load of good, successful songs. But, when it was mentioned earlier, when Tamla Motown came to the UK, they combined the two names. But quite a while before the Tamla Motown label hit the UK, a lot of those early Tamla, Motown, Gaudy singles were being released, and they were released on labels like, in the UK, and labels like London American, Fontana, Oriole, and Stateside.
Where did the name Tamla come from?
I don't know, to be honest.
Oh.
Well, Motown comes from Motortown.
Motortown, yeah.
I'm not sure where Tamla comes from. I shall have to check that out for next time.
Is there anything to do with, because I know you said like the other label was part of his daughter's names and things. Is there anything to do with it, like a family name or a mixing?
I don't know.
Things?
I shall have to find that out.
Oh.
Because, I mean, that is one of the iconic record label names. It must have some kind of history.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't know, because you can't think, oh, he's got it from. It doesn't link to anything, does it?
That's right.
The name itself. Yeah.
It doesn't lend itself to an obvious Latin root or anything, does it?
No,
or maybe it does if there are any Latin scholars listening. And I mean, it was 65, March 19th, when the Supremes released Stop in the Name of Love. And that was the first one on the Tamla Motown, or certainly one of the very early ones on the Tamla Motown label in the UK. But one of the nicest stories, I think, coming out of Tamla Motown was the I Heard It Through the Grapevine track. Oh, everybody immediately thinks, oh, absolutely, Marvin Gaye classic. Well, nearly wasn't. Because it was originally recorded by the Miracles, and we'll have a few dates here. Recorded by the Miracles on the 6th of August 1966. And Berry Gordy heard the recording and thought, ooh, Sharpin, take a breath. No, I don't really like that very much. And then it was recorded by Marvin Gaye on April the 10th.
So do you know who wrote the song?
Yeah, I do, actually. It was Norman Whitfield and Barrett Strong.
Yeah, right.
And then Marvin Gaye recorded it in 1967 on April the 10th. And again, maybe not. But then it was recorded by Gladys Knight and the Pips, and it was released. So that was actually the first release of it. And that was 1967, September the 25th. So that's a good year after the Miracles had given it a try. And then, another year, and that was a big hit in both the UK and America. But Berry Gordy, always an eye, I guess, to the main deal. He gave Marvin Gaye's version a release on the 30th of October 1968, and that's the one that's gone down in sort of rock and roll history as the classic version. But I always thought it was quite an interesting story, that.
I had no idea that Gladys Knight had done it.
Yeah.
None.
And she had a big hit with
it? 67, did you say she brought it out?
Yeah, September 67.
I was 9.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't have, it would have gone past me, that one.
Yeah. I think it was on the Soul label. I can't remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure that it was on the Soul label in the UK. And it was really at this time that Motown was really having some great times, releasing lots of really good stuff. And I mean, one of the things as we get into the 1970s, Marvin Gaye released an album called What's Going On to great acclaim. But it was around now, 1972, that Berry Gordy, well, he actually moved to LA, but it wasn't then, the early 70s, when he was thinking about the move. There was some very major riots in Detroit in 1967, and after those particular riots, he thought, I think we perhaps ought to move the operation over to LA. So in 1972, they actually did move. And I wouldn't say it was the end for Motown, because obviously all the session musicians, one or two may have moved, I'm not sure. But I think the vast majority of them stayed in the Detroit area because they were session musicians in that area. So that's where they were making all the good music. And Stevie Wonder had a very acclaimed album as well in the mid '70s, Songs in the Key of Life. But really, it was moving very much towards the end game for Motown. Berry Gordy decided that he'd sell the label, and in 1988 he sold it to MCA $61 million.
So he was all right then.
He hung on to Jobette, the publishing arm. So he's probably, not short of a bob or two, as you might say.
Yes.
But I mean, it's such a great story that, I mean, particularly when you look at people like the Four Tops, and you think, when they joined on the Workshop Jazz label, their own album was shelved while they were recording it, and then they would go in and they'd be backing singers for the likes of Gladys Knight and the Pips. They'd watch other people being really successful before they were given that Holland Dozier Holland song. So it's quite a fascinating label, really.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we've in the time that we've had, we've obviously just glanced over it, really, but they must have had dozens of acts, and dozens of hits, and probably a few failures as well along the way.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially in the early days, but just a synonymous with, you just say the name and it instantly conjures up a sound in your head, doesn't
exactly.
it? You don't think of anything else but...
Yeah. Very distinctive.
Very distinctive.
I mean, the other really interesting thing about the whole Motown thing in the middle 60s was they were one of the areas of American music that didn't get completely steamrolled by the British invasion that started with the Beatles. Actually, around this time, on this very day, in 1964, you could argue that the British invasion started because it's on this day in 1964 that they had their first appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show. And whereas an awful lot of American acts fell by the wayside, Tamla Motown went from strength to strength, particularly with the Holland Dozier Holland compositions.
Derek, it's been absolutely fantastic, very insightful as always, and Derek will be back after the 10 o'clock news when we will be doing On This Day. Can't wait.